Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar from the Startup Factory. Today, we're going to be talking about your startup KPIs. The intention really over the next 50 minutes to an hour is to give you some food for thought, some practical examples of KPIs and measures outside of business to kind of stir your thinking and ultimately to guide you to some pragmatic KPIs and a dashboard for your own business. We're going to walk through some examples and some best practices and then have Q&A at the end. And what I'd like to propose is at the end of the session, you go away, have some reflection thoughts on what we've talked around this morning, and then perhaps share your own KPI dashboard with us, and we can give you some feedback. So I'm Ian Brookes. I'm one of the co-founders of the Startup Factory. And I think the phrase I'd like you to kind of keep at the back of your minds throughout this webinar is how to measure what matters. There's lots of data out there, lots of information. We can measure everything. But there's a great quote here from a guy called Ridgway many years ago. Not everything that matters can be measured. Not everything that we can measure matters. Bit of a tongue twister. But fundamentally, you do need to apply your own gut instinct, your feel, your knowledge for the business, and what you're trying to achieve as your startup, rather than just develop a set of KPIs and stare blankly at them. So creating calls to action is also one of the key things I'd like you to keep in mind. What is really important to you? What are the key measures? And ask yourself, so what, on the back of them. So the agenda really is to kind of walk you through what is a KPI and how they're used. And I'll give you some examples outside of business to kind of illustrate those points. We'll then talk around the anatomy of effective KPIs. What makes an effective KPI is very relevant to your business. And there are some best practices around that, just to give you a framework and a template as to how to go around developing them. Equally, let's not reinvent the wheel. There are lots of well-established startup KPIs which are relevant for most startups, but there are some specifics to your business, and those are the ones I'd be interested on you developing and sharing with us, and us giving you some feedback at the end. I'll give you a bit of a process on how you go about building a KPI dashboard, and then the last 10 minutes or so we'll open up for any Q&A. So we are recording this webinar. We'll share the recording, and equally we'll share the deck. So this focus on KPIs really started nearly 30-40 years ago. Two academics, Kaplan and Norton, developed this concept of the balanced scorecard. And if you look at the structure of this, it kind of captures the essence of a business, the four drivers, which I think form the bedrock for any KPI dashboard around this balance. How do customers see us? For any startup, growth is the real driver, and thus a customer perspective is essential. Yes, we can measure the traction and the reality of the revenue growth, but actually the customer perspective tells us a lot about what we're doing right and what we're not doing right. What must we excel at the internal perspective? So again, the importance of processes in a startup are often misunderstood and ignored. You know, how do we actually attract? How do we find? How do we win? How do we keep customers? So what are the internal business processes that we need to measure our performance on? Then improvement, and there's two aspects to that for me in a startup. One is that innovation buzz, that drive for new stuff, creating differentiation, wowing our customers in our market. But equally, what are we learning? So the whole lean startup of build, measure, learn leans into the need for KPIs. And then how do we look to our investors? What's the financial perspective? So again, there's that internal, external view on, are we performing? Are we hitting our metrics? But the balanced scorecard is, for me, a good phrase. It's the essence of what you need to take into your series of KPIs and then your KPI dashboard. And this is really how Kaplan and Norton then developed that. They rolled that out into financial learning and growth, customer internal business processes, and define that. So from a customer, to achieve our vision, how should we appear to our customers? And they developed this template, which I think is a really useful template to use for your KPIs. So looking at the 4 perspectives, I think is really healthy and really interesting. And again, that can evolve over time. And that mixture of internal and external, I think, is really important. But what are your objectives? What are the measures? What are the targets? And what are the initiatives? What are the calls to action and the plans and the strategies that you're actually doing? So this is a good takeaway, I think, in terms of developing that set of KPIs, because it has to be linked to your overall objectives. You've then got some measures. And what are you shooting for? What's the ambition? And again, we'll develop some of that thinking and some of those metrics. And we'll also talk about the difference between measures and metrics and how you use KPIs and how they are developed. But fundamentally, it's all a KPI does is point you and signpost you into doing something. Either something's not working, something isn't on track, or it's not on plan. So what are you going to do about it? Or what are you going to do to make sure you give yourself the best chance of hitting that target? So that's the first takeaway, really, this slide here, I think, to actually develop a document cascaded down from your vision and your strategy to actually translate that into objectives. And then what are you doing day to day to secure the growth from your startup? I'm now just going to look at 3 or 4 existing templates where KPIs are used on a day-to-day basis. Just want you to kind of step back from being overly focused on your startup and a business set of metrics to put into the context of how KPIs are used on a day-to-day basis. The first example is really in a health setting. And we've all, for good or bad reason, probably been in hospital and been wired up to one of these machines. And let's look at what it measures. It measures blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, respiratory rate, the vital signs. And what's interesting about this, of course, is there's some graphical representation, not just numbers, and there's some ratios. So again, the richness of the data, how the data is captured, how it's presented, but what it's focused on. Now, what are those vital signs trying to assess? How are we using that information on blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, and respiratory rate? How are they used? And again, this is one of the key things to take away from today is how are you going to use your KPIs? So they're measuring where the patient is currently and what those metrics are saying against the benchmarks. So the normal body temperature, the normal blood pressure, the normal breathing rate. They're looking at the trend. Is it up? Is it down? Is it stable? And over what time period have those changes been seen? So in a very simple set of metrics, but very quickly, there's a lot of rich intelligence and information. What's it telling us? And of course, then the interaction with a medical professional is what are the options? What are the next steps for an intervention? So a very straightforward example, it's giving you a snapshot. It's the time period, it's the trend, and asking yourself, so what? What do we need to do next? And that diagnostic aspect of KPIs, I think, is really important. The second example I'd share with you is in the cockpit. You know, very simply, as a pilot, you're looking at your altitude, you're looking at your direction, you're looking at your speed, you're looking at the fuel gauge. Now, there's a lot more information, obviously, going on these dials. And that's the ability to drill down and look at some specifics where things aren't going right. The vital signs is taking a snapshot of where you are now, what do we need to do to take corrective action? And in some respects in the cockpit, it's the same. At this moment in time, is everything as expected? The direction of travel, our altitude, our fuel, etc. 4 basic metrics, but obviously some complex underlying drivers. And the true value here of the KPIs is they can drill down and look at the drivers and the individual performance. So the example here is, you know, it's got 4 engines. Something's not quite right. What's the individual engine performance? So we can drill down. But where the KPIs are only evaluating context is adding in external factors. So what's the weather like? What's the other air traffic? Are there unexpected events in the area? So the KPIs will give you an indication of your circumstances at that moment in time. but you need to be aware of external factors that are also an influence. One example at the moment, obviously, could be, interest rate changes and where they're driving the market or the business that you're in. Fundamentally, in the cockpit, will we arrive at our destination as anticipated? That's the outcome. And we're just taking measures here to ensure that that is the expected outcome. But there are these unknown variables. So not everything that matters can be measured when you're in the cockpit. You need that, obviously, contact to make sure you're aware of other air traffic and bad anticipated weather. So again, don't be blinded by your dashboard as being the sole arbiter of information you need. You do need to look out the window and engage that. The third example I'll use is football. So Nathan Teller is our great player we have at Burnley at the minute. And obviously Opta introduced a whole series of stats on player performance. So Nathan has played 24 matches, scored 8 goals, 2 assists, and a number of other metrics there. So what's that measuring? That's measuring Nathan's personal contribution, his activity, his impact, and some of the outcomes his effort is making. Now, you can then take this, obviously, into a business context, into an individual sales person. How many meetings are they having? How many follow-up meetings? How many proposals? How many sales wins they're having? What's the value of the sales win? So again, KPI can be at a business level or an individual level. What's this really being used to tell us about Nathan's performance? Well, it's all about his personal performance. It's also identifying where's improvement needed. Perhaps his goals per game ratio isn't good enough. His conversion of chances to goals isn't good enough. What's his overall contribution to the team? In terms of his objectives and the measures that he's been evaluated on. How does that compare to other players? And what's the impact on team results? So again, why are you using these KPIs? Why are they relevant? What are they focused on? What's the true value and how are you going to action them? So it may be that Nathan needs a bit more shooting practice. Maybe his accuracy isn't there. So again, you need to drill down and reflect and ask yourself, so what? Once you've got a series of KPIs. KPIs will not tell you the answer. When the Burnley manager comes off at half-time and his team and the scoreboard showing we're losing 2-0, it's not telling him what to do. He needs to take the information in and process it in an intelligent way and use the stats to direct the actions. So it's about informing action and creating those calls to action. So just 3 examples there from a pilot, from a footballer to the NHS as to how everyday stats are there. The sort of reflection I'd ask you to take is how relevant they are. And what would you do if you quickly had to have 5 key KPIs in your hand today for your business? What would they be in terms of instinctively telling you what are the decisions I need to make? So let's move on to the second section. Why are metrics important and how you go about setting them and what makes them effective? So just a number of points to share with you, really. Startup Land talks about a North Star. It's a bit of an overused phrase, but basically it's, what are my overall objectives? What am I trying to achieve with this venture? What does success look like? And from that, you have to cascade that into some specific objectives, goals, and targets. And now's a good time to do it. Start of the new calendar year, you're refreshed, revived, you're energized. You may have an existing dashboard, but it's always good to kind of challenge that and change your metrics. But specifically, this SMART approach, I think, is well grounded. They must be specific. They must be very focused. Leave no room for misinterpretation. Stuff must be measurable. Again, there's quantifiable and qualitative aspects of KPIs, but specifically what we're looking to build here is a data-driven decision-making toolkit. So what is measurable? What's actionable? What can you then do about it? Ask yourself, so what is a really powerful question. So what does this mean? So what can I do in the next 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months? Once we've got a series of data and a series of KPIs, what are we going to do as a result of this information? And we'll come on to the importance of trends and timeline shortly. You have to be relevant. You can have a lot of vanity metrics, which kind of, and the best one for me is LinkedIn followers. You know, everyone collects LinkedIn followers. But are they the sort of customers, the sort of personas that we're going to help grow our business, that we're going to sell to, that can influence? So, you know, only measure what's relevant and time-bounded. Again, the time frame and the cycles in your business will dictate what is a relatively small, medium, long-term time frame. And again, that's a dimension which I think is worth considering in terms of being relevant to your sales cycle, your product development cycle, you know, how long it takes people to go through the sales funnel. But all your metrics must be smart. And again, there's lots of information on the internet you can research as to the definition of smart, but hopefully you'll appreciate the relevance to you. Now, many startups that come to us for guidance and help don't have any metrics, and they're quite vague about what they're trying to achieve, what the direction of travel is, what does success look like. And without that, people wander. They go right, left, forwards and backwards. And I think you need to kind of reflect on where you are in terms of what are you trying to achieve? Do you know where you are? What's the direction? What's the improvement? What's working? What's not? So KPIs, when they're of value, are very pragmatic in actually removing vagueness and chaos. They kind of create alignment and give you that real focus on what really matters and help to set priorities. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no one size fits all. But if we're looking at growth and progress, what does that actually mean to you? And to define growth and define progress in terms of measures and metrics and timescales and some specifics. So it can be product release milestones, number of features, incremental revenue. It can be number of customers, average value of order, customer retention, all those sort of things. If you're not careful, you'll end up with a spray of metrics and measures. So you need to refine that and typically going back to that balanced scorecard, try and get them into those families, those groups where that will create alignment and will create a performance culture in terms of this is what we're trying to achieve. These are our priorities. And what you're measuring should be the activity and the drivers that you're trying to get your business to grow. Over time, probably once a quarter, when you're reviewing these metrics and KPIs, question and change them. What's relevant today won't be relevant in 3 months or 6 months' time, or the actual target could actually change in terms of what you've learned about your market, what you've learned around your business. So don't become complacent and get happy that we are 50% ahead of our target. Well, that could be because you're doing something really well and you're being successful, or it could be your target isn't high enough. So again, questioning and changing your metrics, not on a willy-nilly basis, not on a random basis, but in a structured way to maybe look at stretch targets and stretch metrics. And maybe there are new KPIs that you need to introduce that you didn't originally think you needed. So the context is really important. Cascading down from your overall vision for your startup into objectives. What are the key critical milestones that you're looking to achieve? And like I say, it can be product releases, number of customers, cash burn, building your team. What are those handful of key milestones that if you know you achieve, then you are making progress and success is on its way? And those milestones, you know, I'd argue could be, in a typical startup, could be over a 12 to 18 month period. But also look at the drivers. So team is often one that is not looked at in a typical startup KPI dashboard. But I'd argue a team is as important as your product. If you don't have the right people in place with the skills and the capacity, you're not going to be able to grow. So think about the milestones, the drivers, the pillars in your business that you need to measure. Marketing is one, obviously, as well. And people often mistake marketing for sales. We'll come on to that because I think it's marketing is the really important driver of sales. 3 kind of attributes that you're looking in what your growth aspirations are about the momentum. Are we getting better? Are we building up speed here? Are we getting a pace into the business? Is the business becoming dynamic? Often at the outset, a startup, there's lots of jobs to be done, and it can be clunky and it's a bit chaotic, but getting clarity and building momentum. So what momentum KPIs would you look at? Then the velocity, the speed, our ability to execute. We're becoming more efficient. The business model is becoming clearer. What's the velocity of the business? And then the trajectory. What's the rate of growth? So the words are important here to translate your thinking into action and then measuring and setting targets. But momentum, velocity, and trajectory are three attributes of your startup, which I think are really worth thinking about defining what it is you're trying to achieve. Where's the friction? Where's the blockers? Where do we need to improve? Measuring your progress at frequent intervals. Now, the interval very much depends on your business cycle. If your sales cycle is weekly, you obviously need a different set of metrics and to check in on them if your business cycle is monthly or even quarterly. Quarterly is a good period of time, I always think. Weekly and monthly give you snapshots, but stuff can fall in or fall out of those time periods. You don't always get things done. On a quarterly basis, I think you start to get a feel for that momentum, for the velocity, for the trajectory. You start to see and sense and learn things over a 13-week period. So capturing data at the right interval is also important, and the context relative to your business cycle in terms of frequency of customer meetings, follow-up, issue of proposals, closing business. As a tech business, developing those additional features, testing them, releasing them. So again, make sure you don't over measure or under measure in terms of the time period. Going back to the pilot example, you need a dashboard that's got those key metrics, the things that you need at your fingertips to really tell you what's happening. Are we making it happen? Are we making progress? Are we moving forward? But then you need to drill down to the supporting metrics. And revenue growth is an interesting one, which again we'll come on to in terms of one of the drivers behind revenue growth. Obviously, number of customers, unit sales, pricing, all sorts of things drive that revenue figure. So again, don't just kind of think, right, we're going to measure revenue growth. What are the drivers? And that's the key word for KPIs. What are the drivers of that growth? And making sure you've got key metrics on that. The important thing for me is socializing performance metrics and KPIs in your startup. You want everyone owning and talking about them. Yeah, there are specific KPIs that are owned by members of your team, but sharing them and giving them visibility, I think, is really important because you want collaboration. Equally, people can spot stuff. You can't be too close to your own discipline and your own responsibilities. What do other people think? So a collaborative approach to sharing, democratizing KPIs in a startup is something we always encourage. And it gives everyone that holistic view and that sense of collective ownership. A startup is a team effort. It's not all about the founder. It's about the contribution of everyone. And anecdotally, people see and touch and hear things around them on a day-to-day basis that they can add into the conversation. So again, making KPIs and the dashboard part of a monthly team meeting, sharing the good and the bad news, I think is really helpful. And then my final point really is use metrics, but make good decisions. Now, that's not contradictory. I'm not saying ignore them, but bad data can lead to bad decisions. So your intuition and kind of what your intuition tells you about the data, how you're interpreting the data. There's qualitative aspects of it as well. So, for example, quality of the product could be an issue, and you're hearing some customer feedback that actually perhaps the quality isn't as high or as good as it should be compared to competitor offerings. So feed that in, or you're sensing that perhaps the team aren't as motivated. People aren't jumping in and staying on and working as hard as they can. There's a little bit of disquiet in the team. So always have your kind of spider sense finely tuned and aware. Because as I said, the example about a football manager, the football manager will get all the stats at half time if they're 2-0 down. So what are they going to do? What are their eyes? What are they sensing? What are they picking up? So the metrics and KPIs are there to give you some data points. They're not there to say this is the decision you need to make. And it's what to measure that often kind of people flounder around. There's a few things here which are really quite important. Measure changes and track trends, not totals. Absolutes can be misleading, but your startup story is all about growth. So what's the rate of growth? What's the percentage development? Where are we? What have you achieved in this last month? What's the comparison to 3 months ago? So yeah, sales may be a good number, but what's the rate of growth? Or are we just hanging in there? And of course, churn often hides and masks an issue in a revenue number, in terms of you're going really well on new business, but you've got a leaky bucket. So a couple of things about users and customers. Startup growth is all about customer traction, customer growth. Yes, it relates to product. Yes, it relates to team. But for me, it's about thinking about your customers and your revenue. So what's moving that growth is your new weekly, monthly customers and users, active users and churn. You know, that avoiding that leaky bucket. You could be doing really well with new biz and attracting many, many new customers. But if you're losing 10 or 15%, there's a churn. What's causing the churn? And any startup needs stickiness. You need to retain those customers, those early adopters, those early advocates, to recover the cost of customer acquisition and then move into profit. So one of the finance metrics is, you know, where are we compared to our break even? How many months away? What's the cash burn? How many customers? How much revenue? How much profit do we need to get to monthly break even and then cumulative break even? So again, it's not just all about cash per se, it's the drivers of cash and that cumulative position. And one of the things to really focus on is to look at that conversion funnel at each stage, you know, from creating awareness, creating engagement, having the conversation. How are your sales activities creating stickiness and conversion in that sales funnel? So again, just a snapshot there, number of users, trends, not totals. And I just sketched this out to give you that example in terms of why measuring absolute is not as good as measuring growth. So the graph on the left, in terms of steady growth, same amount of revenue every month, we're not really growing. Stagnation in terms of total revenue means we're just replacing what we're losing, where you're actually looking at the change. So always look at change, not absolute. Absolute is good in terms of milestones. You know, we want to achieve 1 million revenue in year 1, laudable target, measure against that. But what are we doing this month to actually achieve that total? What's the run rate? For those of you that follow limited overs cricket, I always think it's a really good example of the target we need to hit that total to win the game is very similar to what do we need to do this month to close £1 million in revenue in the next 12 months. So it's all about the change, the incremental stuff, and that's where you can move the dial and do things. Bad data leads to bad decisions. I think we all know that. And here's just 4 examples, which is why it's important to measure the right things. So Columbus set out, believe it or not, to map Asia, but ended up discovering America. I'm not sure whether he turned left rather than right. I'm pretty sure he turned right when he left Italy. But the challenge that he collected, bad data, he collected the distance he needed to sail in Persian miles rather than Roman miles, and ended up where he wasn't expecting to be. Not quite sure of the geography on that, to be honest, but that's the reality if you read the story. And that's because he had bad data. He expected to sail a certain amount of miles, and when he'd done that, he thought he'd found Asia, but he hadn't. He'd found America. The Lehman Brothers example is quite stunning in terms of financial mismanagement, that they had old historic data that had overvalued assets as security on loans. And when the financial crisis hit and they were looking to liquidate these assets, they had bad data on their assets being overvalued by 55%. NASA example, again, they just had poor out-of-date data that wasn't accurate enough, and they missed Mars by nearly 200,000 miles. And in the context of traveling to Mars, it doesn't sound a great deal, but it meant that they never actually landed on Mars, and therefore the 193 million cost never actually enabled them to do any research. And the example we'll all remember is the Great Storm of 1987, where Michael Fish on the BBC Weather said there's going to be no hurricane. And that data was taken from the weather centre in London, whereas the weather centres in the south coast were predicting, a really, really bad storm. So again, measuring the wrong data and using the wrong data can lead to some really bad decisions. So again, just some 4 examples there, and going back to those examples, the NHS and the pilot and football, just be mindful of where the data is, what sort of data you're collecting, and why you're collecting it. And finally, in terms of creating a dashboard, not everybody likes spreadsheets. So how you present the data will really drive how effective your KPIs could be. So you could have good data, you could have a good data collection process, it could all be timely, it could all be accurate, all those attributes of what makes good data. But how you present it and the frequency of how you present it is important. So once you've defined what your KPIs are, visualizing them and having them on a dashboard up in the office or on a shared drive, I think is really important. And visualize it. If you visualize it, people can see where they fit in. We can also read trends easier on a graph. We can see ups and downs. We can see high points and low points, rather than having to kind of assimilate that from a collection of data on a spreadsheet. As I said earlier, and I really encourage you, once you've set these KPIs, even if you're only a team of 3, 4 or 5 people, invite everyone to comment on what they see and draw the conclusions, because again, it's a team game. So if everyone's aligned on what the challenges and the opportunities are, it creates that collective call to action for a team, and everyone feels empowered. So don't keep it to yourself. Even the data that's not great news, do share that. Monitoring these multiple metrics concurrently is also important as well. What is the sales team doing? What's the tech team doing? What the marketing team doing? Pulling it all together creates this alignment. I can't emphasize that creates this performance improvement as a collaborative effort, and also creates a performance culture. And it also reflects that, in our experience, the transparency and honesty of the startup founder or leader really sets the tone for the business. And in many respects, the culture and leadership values can pull you through when times aren't great. It creates that rallying call, creates that trust, creates that respect. So data has a really important role in terms of your direction of travel, dictating what you need to be doing, where are you against plan, but also creates a togetherness. It's, we're in this together, it's shared data, it's shared purpose, and giving that, I think we found has been really important. And certainly one of the pillars of a successful startup is everyone knows where we are, everyone knows what needs to be done, the priorities are understood, and you've got that team alignment. So data can really create that alignment. Some best practices, all really KPIs are data points, and how you use them and whether you're heading in the right direction, as I've kind of mentioned previously. But 6 points really just to give you some food for thought here, and reflect on what you need to do before you just jump into setting a set of KPIs that you've been on the internet and your own experience tell you this is what we do. What are your business imperatives? I can't emphasize that enough. What are we trying to achieve? What do we need to measure to ensure we are making progress, we're heading in the right direction? Top down and bottom up. So kind of looking at both that granular level of detail, having that to hand. So if you need to drill into the data, making sure you've got that, but equally kind of what is that overall view? What's the strategic level view? So you go back to the patient, we're just looking at that heartbeat, we're looking at the blood pressure, we're looking at temperature, we're looking at the vital signs. what are the vital signs of your business? What are the 4 or 5 key things that you need to look at? But then you need the bottom-up metrics to kind of give you that diagnostic. So you need kind of top-down and bottom-up view. Don't just get too comfortable with looking at the overall progress. What's happening under the bonnet? Revenue is growing. We're adding 10 new customers a week, but we're losing 5. You know, we've got that leaky bucket. So just make sure you're kind of aware of that. You need processes to capture the data. So don't kind of create an over elaborate set of KPIs or data on your dashboard that is difficult to get to. It's costly to collate and present it, or you're not sure about the accuracy. Now, be comfortable with the tolerance. You know, you're looking at trends, you're looking at consistency of measures. But if something's out by 10%, it's kind of, for me, it's a little bit of a concern to start relying on that data. And the cost of it, as I mentioned, is equally important. So it has to be cost effective, easy to collect, and it has to be accurate. And it's worth emphasizing that the next point about actionable. It makes you aware that you need to do something and you can do something about it. So it's that balance of what internally can we do about it, but what are the external forces? What are the nuances that we're seeing in the market that the KPIs are taking us? You know, back to that example of the pilot, you know, bad weather report, well, actually means we need to go around the storm. So in our market, if we've got some turbulence in our market, how are we going to react? What do we need to do? All our KPIs tell us we're in good nick, but in the next 3 months, there could be some difficulty, there could be some challenges. So again, interpreting actionable KPIs relative to your market and how sensitive they are. So, you know, if we were to flex the KPI by plus or minus 10%, 20%, what would that be telling us? If our ARR falls by 20%, so what? So again, don't just kind of look at them as static. Try and read them as dynamic, both in terms of trends, looking backwards historically, but also then forward looking. Flex your KPIs, do some modeling on them and look at the trends. You know, go forward 6 months, 12 months. And is that telling you, yes, that's where we want to be in that time period? Now, we may not have planned that far ahead, but extrapolating and projecting your KPIs is a useful exercise as well in terms of your overall longer term direction. You know, if we're growing at 10% and we're comfortable, but next year we want to grow by 20%, what are today's KPIs telling us about our ability to reach and get to that level of performance? So the lead and lag are quite important, and also how you flex them and how you interpret them and how you model them. So I'm just taking a glass of water. A couple of points here, really, just to, again, it may seem obvious, but it's worth just getting your feet on the ground between the difference between a measure and a metric. So a measure is a number, it's a single digit or data point. The example here is we made £10,000 worth of sales last month. The metric is how you interpret that. Where does that sit in terms of budget, or what we did last month, or what we're hoping to do next month? So comparison and using KPIs as dynamic metrics gives you more information. You've got a single data point which has value because you can track that, but it's the tracking and the evaluation of your KPIs that are important. It's a dashboard. It kind of gives you that signpost. It's where we are today. What have we achieved? But what's the relevance of that and the relative nature of it compared to last month, the next month, and budget? So measures and metrics are worth looking at. And outcome and performance metrics. We made £25,000 of sales last quarter, £10,000 more than the previous month. That was an outcome. A performance metric, as I said to you, you look under the activities. What's driving that performance? What's having a positive impact on the outcome? And different interpretation of lag and lead. Lag measure is the outcome. The lead is what do we need to do to achieve that outcome in advance? And obviously here the example is just simplistically sales calls. And there is a cause and effect, obviously, in terms of number of sales calls you're making, and that's above the target. So again, think about the drivers, think about the performance metrics, the activity levels you need to achieve in order to achieve the outcome. And again, this is kind of some of the stuff around the underlying drivers of your business, which I think are important to understand. And, you know, if we increase that from 50 to 60, what would that do to the outcome? But obviously that then depends on the quality of the sales calls, how sticky the sales calls, how many meetings, how many proposals. So using KPIs to cascade down and measure your activity and where you need to put more effort. Does that mean we need some more training in our sales team, or do we need to hire somebody else to increase the volume? So again, it's the KPIs kind of should signpost you to some action, some call to action as to what you need to do to improve or correct the outcomes that you're making. So the final session on the webinar is looking at your startup dashboard. So I'd encourage you to go back and look at that balanced scorecard in terms of the structure of that and focus on that as a way of documenting. And as a team exercise, I think we've found that really useful, bringing product people into the room with salespeople, with the marketing. Everyone's on the same page and they understand what the business is trying to achieve overall, and breaking that down into their individual functions. User interest, user conversion at the very simplistic level, looking at what a startup growth is all about. It's about customer attraction, retention, and spend. So I'm not advocating that's the only thing you look at, but fundamentally startup growth in terms of organic cash generation, and then ultimately going to investors to look at their involvement, is that customer traction is really important. And don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of examples on the internet of people who've developed startup dashboards and metrics. And I think these are the 6 for me, which are important, but adding in the team one as well to that. I've split marketing and sales because I think they are very different functions in your startup. But customer growth, I think, you know, are we sticky? Are we winning? Are we growing our customer base? But what's driving that? And they will specific to your stage of growth and those specific objectives that you have. If you're in the first 3 months, you know, developing your product and product release is important. Then you're about creating awareness, your marketing effectiveness, then your sales effectiveness, and obviously revenue growth is an outcome of having a good product in the right market with a good sales team. Some examples then I'll just walk you through in terms of what are the stages in a startup business model that you should be looking at. And this is a kind of a template that we've developed at the Startup Factory. And again, these should be the active conversations you're having with yourself, you're having with your team. And again, I think this is a useful framework in terms of what does success look like for a startup? What are the drivers? So how good are we in attracting prospective clients? Are we a brand that is well known? Are we attractive to them in terms of, oh, these guys are doing something interesting? How good are we engaging? So how good are we actually getting people to notice us, then bringing them in? And then how much value do we create for them? And that's the acid point, isn't it? You know, are we solving a problem that has a sufficient pain for them, and the value we are offering is something they want to buy? Now, how good are we at retaining clients is always a challenge. There are that many different business models these days. You know, are you a monthly subscription model? Are you a quarterly purchase renewal? Is it an annual cycle where you retain clients? So again, you know, as I said earlier, the set of KPIs has to be crafted around your business model and your business cycle. What's the process and the period of retaining clients? What is our economic sustainability? Yeah, we've got cash burn, but it's manageable. Or is our cash burn a little bit worrying? You know, we've only got 18 months runway left. The last couple of months haven't been good. What if we extrapolate that? So one of the things I advocated earlier is kind of using your KPIs and modeling it. So at the moment on our current run rate, we've got 18 months, but actually if we look at the last 2 months, it hasn't been great, and that brings it down to 14 months. So again, it's always worthwhile looking to the horizon, looking at short-term metrics, interpreting those and applying those in a longer term time frame to make sure you are tracking the right things. Are we growing the team? Capacity, capability, headcount, skills, all those sort of things. Internally, processes, are we learning? Are we improving? And then are we hitting product milestones and release targets? So I think there's a good 7 there that I think are good questions to ask yourself. And from that, asking so what, and tracking that both in a KPI dashboard, but doing some financial modeling. Typically, these are the KPIs then that we'd suggest around acquisition, engagement, and value. Again, these, like I say, don't reinvent the wheel. These are all well proven. Inbound and outbound page, social channel, events, direct. Where are you acquiring that first point of contact with a prospect? What's working? What's the most sticky channel in terms of creating that initial engagement, and then taking that initial engagement into meaningful conversations, live demo requests, conversion to pilots, content downloads. I talked previously about measuring each stage of the funnel, having a meaningful conversation, right? Can I give you a demo? Can we then do a pilot? So taking people down the funnel, which is relevant to your business model. Content downloads are always good because you can track those and there's some interest and they've downloaded it for a reason. So there's always a good buy indicator, I think, on content downloads. So again, how you follow that up. Value, very simple metrics: revenue, paid subscriptions, daily active users. In a SaaS model, you've sold the subscription, but are they actually using it, or are you at risk of churn? So daily active users is a kind of an outcome model, an outcome metric that you do need to be aware of, because if they're not using your product or service, then they're likely to churn. Retention metrics, very straightforward: churn, renewals, returning. Economics, again, I've used economics rather than just financial. Yes, you need to look at cash flow and burn rate, but that's an outcome. Your cash flow and your burn rate are a function of your revenue, cash coming in, less costs, cash going out. So looking at customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, revenue growth, break-even is a really key one for me. When are we looking to achieve break-even? Modeling that on a quarterly basis, looking at the trends towards that. Are we getting the revenue growth we need to achieve break-even? Are we spending more than we anticipated, and therefore break-even is pushing out? And investors will be much more impressed and interested with your break-even analysis than if you just rocked up and said, we've got 6 months runway of cash left. What are the underlying drivers of your cash burn and your cash flow? And break-even is where you need to get to convince both yourself and investors that you've actually got a viable business model that is generating revenue. And maybe your investment ask is, once we hit break even, we want to grow the sales and marketing team and the product team. And therefore, the investment ask is about scaling. But break even is a key metric to get onto, but it's quite complicated around price, revenue, customers, but it's a good business management metric in terms of the overall things coming together. Team, headcount, gaps, key roles, skill sets, capability, but the pulse. So we always encourage all our startups to take an internal survey at least every quarter. Every month's probably too much, but it could be worthwhile. What's morale like? Are people motivated? Are they happy at work? You only need 5 or 6 questions, but you start to build a pulse score. Is this an exciting place to work? Are people focused about coming in and driving the business? And then product, deadlines hit, feature cost, customer uplift. So we've got 5 priorities over the next 6 months. These are the release dates. Are we hitting those? What are they costing us to develop? Again, you should have within your roadmap, a cost to developing that particular feature set. And then once you release that feature set, what's the impact on customers? Are we winning more customers because of that new feature? So again, that outcome and performance combination there in terms of what we're doing, are we delivering value? Is it creating the outcomes we seek? You can measure that quite succinctly. So this in the previous slide will hopefully give you a feel for the questions you need to ask around your business and your business model and what you need to be building into your dashboard. Okay, so that's really the end of the webinar from my point of view. Hopefully you've seen a narrative and a story there that takes you through the kind of the context and the principles, what you measure, how you measure it, why you would. Over to you. Any questions that you guys and girls have got? Don't be shy.
Hi Ian, my name is
Hi.
Milad. Thanks for that really great presentation. Wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate it very much. One question which I want to ask, just if you can elaborate on, Ian, is say now we have our metrics, so we understand customer acquisition, we understand retention. When it gets to conversion rate, there is a problem because customers are not converting on that stage.
Yep.
Now, would you just elaborate a little bit in terms of the questions we need to ask to identify the root cause?
Okay, good question. So often a real challenge for startups that, you know, you've got excited, you've got some real traction, you're getting people there, but you're just not getting them over the line. I think you just need to have, the answers aren't in your head or in your building. You need to talk directly to the customer, as you say. So what are the questions? And it's a simple set of questions, really. You know, what is the reason you're not buying? Are we not providing enough value? Are we too expensive? Is our price point beyond what you can get elsewhere? Are the features of what we're offering not quite right for you at the moment? Is it not enough to kind of remove your existing supplier? I think it's just having those questions you've got in your head and being brave and bold enough to actually have those with those prospects. I think they will appreciate the openness and the opportunity to discuss that with you. And once you've got that information and data back, you can then actually do something about it. So it could be that, for example, it could be something in your contract, that your contract's a 6-month contract. They only want to sign a 3-month contract. But everyone's busy these days, so they won't necessarily volunteer that until you ask them. So what are the barriers? What are the blockers? And I think you just need to be bold, open, warm in how you approach it. You know, don't approach it in an aggressive sales way. You know, we're just wondering, you know, we've got so far together and we think we can really help your business and we've got some great value in our product, but you've not bought yet. Can you tell me why? And do it in a very inquiring, inquisitive way. I think that's the only way to do it. Pick up the phone. Don't do it by email. You know, I think you want to talk to the buyer. What's stopping them from making that buying decision? And then you can reflect back. And it could be, well, actually, you know, it's a bit too expensive. Okay, so if we offered you 2 at a discount, you know, don't offer a discount. I'm not into discounts. If it is too expensive, then find other ways of actually adding service wrap or other elements of value. But it's a good question, because the whole point about you've found out that you're not converting, you've got the data, so what? But you can't, the data isn't going to tell you the answer to that. You need to talk to the customer.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Hi Ian, thanks a lot for the talk. Do you have any tips on sort of tools that you can use, either free or paid, to keep tracks on your KPIs and essentially build a dashboard?
Yeah, there are a number of pieces of software out there that offer a free trial. Databox is one that is pretty useful. They offer, you know, a free trial. You can populate and build a bespoke dashboard, and then it obviously moves into a subscription, which I think is a good way of you learning about the value of KPIs and the software. And also automating it to the extent that you don't want to be creating rafts of spreadsheet yourself. I think the stage of your journey, I think, is really important. I think, Andrew, you raised that question. The do's and don'ts in terms of where you're going, I think are very much related to the stage you're at. But yeah, using something like Databox, I think is quite useful, because you don't want to have several pieces of paper that you've got everywhere. Obviously, it then requires you to do a bit of integration from different systems. But if you can integrate RoadMonk or your product development management tool with a CRM tool into a single dashboard, then again, everyone can see it and share it. I think in the terms of the do's and don'ts, to your point, Andrew, I think it's keep it simple. Always try to keep it simple. Always kind of keep it relevant and time bounded to driving activity. And to Jaden's point, having that immediacy and availability of an aggregated set of data would do that, keeping it immediate. And the other must do, I think, is sharing it. If you've got this data, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with the team, because you never know that someone in marketing is having a conversation with a prospect that actually says something that can inform the product team, and the product team may not be having those conversations. So it gives you, as I said, that approach that it drives a performance culture, but it also drives that alignment, I think.
Okay,
so yeah, just have a look. There are quite a few KPI tools around there. Go for the simplest one. Go for the one that's free to start off with, certainly. Okay, so to summarize, measure what matters. That's the mantra, really. Measure what matters. What will move the business forward? Think about those three attributes: the SMART, the time and the trends, the league and the lags. Treat KPIs as signposting. It's like traffic lights. If it's not going well, it's a red. If it's on amber, keep your eye on it. If it's green, actually everything's looking okay. Make sure you follow up and ask, so what? So don't just flippantly look at the data and go, yeah, everything's fine. Do go down and drill down. Avoid your own biases as well. We often can convince ourselves when we're looking at our sales pipeline that we've got leads, we've got marketing qualified leads, we've got sales qualified leads, we've got prospects, whatever definition you put on them. Are you really touching a customer with a real opportunity? So again, those vanity metrics, we've added in 200 people from LinkedIn this week. So what? Until you've had a meaningful conversation and they're moving down your funnel, don't use that as a data point to say we're on our way. Track progress, create calls to action consistently. So it's about your own behavior. What KPIs will do, they'll give you more data, better data, help you make better decisions, make you more informed. But this slide's quite important in terms of measuring what's matters, asking yourself, so what, and avoiding your own bias. To close, one of the things we like to do at TSF is share knowledge. If you go on the website, we've got a host of blogs. We do podcasts from the factory floor, and we have a book, which is a bit of a DIY guide as our own views, how you build tech companies. So if you contact me, Nari or James, we'll ship out a copy of the book. We've also got 2 more webinars in the diary in the next couple of months. Again, keep an eye out on the website or Eventbrite in terms of where they're published. And like I say, output from today, happy to pick up with you all individually. Any further questions you have, or have a go at developing your own set of KPIs, send them in, and we can have a Zoomie to discuss them and see what's working. All my contact details on there. Don't go on my Twitter. Tend to rant and rave a bit about football and politics and stuff on that, but the occasional startup thought of the day on that. But yeah, anyone in the TSF team would be great to see you if you want to wander into the office for a chat and a coffee. This is what we do for a living, and we're keen just to kind of support the startup community in Manchester with sharing our knowledge and experience. So thank you very much for attending. Hope it's been of value. We've recorded it. That'll be available and the slides equally will be available if you're filming that media. Thanks for attending and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Bye.